Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry we're getting a little bit of a late start. Thank you all for being here. We're really excited to host our CD11 candidate mobility debate. And unfortunately, Tracy Park had to leave town on a family emergency. We hope everything is okay. She will not be joining us, but we're very excited to have Erin Darling, Greg Good, Mike Newhouse, and Allison Holdorff Polhill with us. And we're excited to get started. So let's get into it. This is our agenda. So I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes of just some context and history that you may or may not know, both about the district and just Los Angeles mobility in general. Then we're going to go into candidate opening statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to give an opening statement. Then we have 7 curated questions that the Streets for All Steering Committee will ask, and each candidate will get 1 minute to answer. And we'll keep rotating the order, so not one person will go first each time. It'll rotate. Then we'll open it up to audience Q&A, and finally we'll get to candidate closing statements. And again, it'll be 1 minute for each closing statement. So let's get right into the context and history. We wanted to frame this discussion in what we see as sort of the problem and the challenge in Los Angeles. So we'll start with the economy. Gridlock and traffic in Los Angeles cost our economy $19 billion a year in lost productivity. So it's quite expensive to live the way we live with so much traffic. We have one of the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. And actually last week, it's official that the LA region has the worst air quality in the country of any major urban area. This stat blew us away when we first found it. Nighttime domestic violence actually goes up by 9% in Los Angeles on the worst traffic days. So it's so stressful, and nobody's in a good mood after sitting in a ton of traffic, but it's so stressful that it actually contributes to an increase in nighttime domestic violence. A person is killed, a pedestrian, on average once every 3 days in the city. The average bus is now slower than the average cyclist or scooter rider at less than 11 miles per hour. So it's not a very attractive option if you have alternatives. Our streets are really dangerous for ADA and wheelchair users. They have a 36% higher likelihood of being killed in a crash. And 2/3 of all trips made in the city are less than 5 miles. Half are less than 3 miles. So we see an enormous potential, except for today, with our nearly year-round perfect weather, to really give people transportation options and help get cars off the road. But again, half of all cars that you see on the road every day are going less than 3 miles. If you live in Los Angeles, you smoke up to 4 cigarettes per day just by breathing. And going back to the pedestrian fatality rate, it's not just that we live in a big city and it can be a dangerous thing to live in a big city, but our big city is especially dangerous in the country. Our pedestrian fatality rate is nearly 4 times the national average. And on air quality, the last thing is that we rank worst in the nation for year-round ozone emissions and 5th worst for particle pollution. And we've done a lot of things as a city to try to change the status quo in the situation. In 1977, there was a plan mostly focused on bikes, some ped stuff, 673 miles of changes to the streets. We did 5 miles. In 1996, a new plan came up, 1,680 miles of changes. We did 104 miles. In 2010, 1,684 miles, we did 100. And then the 2015 mobility plan, that's actually incorrect. It's 1,500 miles of changes. And so far we've done 37 miles. So our city is really great at creating plans and trying to address the problem, and just really terrible at actually implementing our own plans. And none of this could be clearer than the way we choose to implement bike lanes. The city, in the mobility plan, there are hundreds of miles of bike lanes, but there are conditions and there are negotiations. We don't automatically implement our mobility plan. The pavement has to be perfect, which means we really only stripe in a bike lane during repaving. Otherwise, usually the pavement isn't perfect and the city won't do it because they've been sued for people falling on imperfect pavement. The council office has to be interested. It doesn't matter if it's on the mobility plan. The council member has a lot of power here and they have to be interested in a certain project. The council office arbitrarily sets a bar on outreach. How many community meetings should there be? Who should you poll? Who should you talk to? Who should you have in the room? It's not a very transparent process. LADOT essentially spends months, or even in some projects, years, making the council office happy. And if the council member signs off, then the project is implemented. This is a very slow, block by block, mile by mile process that is pretty broken. So this is what a mobility plan looks like. It's got over 500 miles of bike lanes. It's got 208 miles of bus lanes. It's got over 1,000 miles of pedestrian improvements that aren't shown on this screen. And it really has stuff all over the city, including in Council District 11. We have implemented 37 miles of the 500 miles of bike lanes and 30 miles of the 208 miles of bus lanes. In CD11 specifically, there's 25 miles of protected bike lanes planned. 4 miles have been implemented. There's 1 mile in Mar Vista on Venice Boulevard, everyone's probably familiar with. There's also more in Manchester and Culver and other places. For bus lanes, there's 24 miles. 2 miles have been implemented. On Wilshire is the main stretch, and then Lincoln will hopefully go in soon. This is the high injury network in Council District 11. These are the 6% of streets that cause 70% of the injuries and deaths. You see Venice Boulevard, Lincoln Boulevard, PCH, San Vicente, and many other streets that are really dangerous to walk on, bike on, and drive on. I did want to highlight our ballot measure that we're working on to try to fix that broken process that I just went through with the mobility plan. And we would welcome anyone that wants to publicly endorse it and support it. And of course, we welcome your signature. But this would do one very simple thing. Healthy Streets LA is an effort to have the city, we mandate that the city implements its own mobility plan anytime they repave the streets. So again, it's not our plan, it's the city's already adopted plan. This would just mandate implementation. I also wanted to highlight 25 by 25. This is our attempt to create a different vision for the city and how we could use space. We were very inspired by what they did in New York City, NYC 25 by 25. We asked if we could copy them with their permission, and we got their permission. And so let me go ahead and play this quick 1-minute video. So we have shown that at every candidate debate we've done. Some have signed on after, some haven't. We invite you to sign on. We welcome you to sign on. In some council districts, like the CD5 race, for example, no matter who wins, it will be someone that has pledged and signed on to this. So you would essentially be promising to work to reallocate 25% of public space back to people and other uses by 2025. It includes things like slow streets, al fresco, bike lanes, bus lanes, plazas, slow streets, street vending, and many other things. Okay. It is now time for opening statements, and I'm going to invite Erin to go first. If you're ready, Erin.
Thanks. My name is Erin Darling. I'm running for City Council. I'm born and raised in Venice. I'm running to address the housing and homelessness crisis, and also to address climate change. And transportation really intersects with both these things. I would point out that I've signed on to the Healthy Streets Initiative. I believe I was the first candidate to do so. And I really do take it as a challenge that 3% of the city's mobility plan has been implemented. And we're just, at this pace, we're just not going to get there. And we need bold leadership. I think transportation intersects with housing, because we need to make it possible for people who work on the West Side to live on the West Side, to stop the super commuters. People have to commute an hour each way. They need to be able to live close to where they work. And obviously with climate change, we need to get people out of cars. And that means creating the infrastructure so that they have real alternatives. That's bus only lanes, that's protected bicycle lanes. And it's basically having intra West Side traffic so that people can do daily life, not with a car. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Erin. Greg, you're next.
Yeah, great. Okay. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Streets for All. Thank you, all the folks out there watching, and thank you to my fellow candidates. It's good to see everybody. I am Greg Good. I'm running for LA City Council, District 11, because despite the fact that we live in one of the most envied communities in the world, there's some deep unhappiness. It's a paradox, and I think that we can solve it. We got to solve it together. One of the keys to that unhappiness, I think, is our mobility system, and in other words, how we get around. Then we need a mobility system that is safe, that is walkable, that is livable, that is equitable, and that reflects the quality of life needs of all of our constituents. Those are goals that I think we can all agree to and we can all share, and we got to work together to get there. We got to work together to get to those solutions. I know how to do that. I've done that in many ways and many times in my career, and I look forward to working with y'all toward that end.
Thanks, Greg. Mike? You're on mute.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Mike Newhouse here. I'm a resident of Venice, for those of you who I don't know. I've lived here for 26 years and raising my sons, who are 14 and 11, and biking, accessibility, public transportation are important to us and our family. And it's obviously one of the biggest issues that are broken in Los Angeles. I think how we have to look at our transportation issues are as follows, and I encourage you to go to my website for detailed plans on each of these. But it's not only a transportation issue. We need more public transportation. We need more walkable cities. We need better bike lanes. We need better opportunities to use transportation that gets us out of cars. But what we also have to do is we have to center our building on transit-oriented corridors and on areas that can become transit-oriented corridors. And the easiest way to do that is to adaptively reuse our unused commercial office space in buildings that'll never be full again. And by housing people there, we create housing and we create the services right there in that neighborhood. I'll talk more about that later.
Thank you. Allison.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for having us here today. I'm Allison Holdorff Polhill. I support the mission of Streets for All, including I have signed on for 25 by 25. I also signed on for Healthy Streets way back when. And I'm an avid cyclist myself, although I have to be honest, I stick to the beach path because of the lack of safety. Environmental protection is why I devoted my life to public service. My environmental plans are on my website. I invite you to go there, allisonforla.com. And it's part of my discussions with community leaders throughout the district. My activism began as a first-year attorney when I took on the nuclear industry that was trying to dump radioactive waste into the Colorado River, a major water source for Southern California. I'm honored to have the support of Dr. Joseph Liu with Coalition for Clean Air, who I've worked with when I was the chief advisor for LA School Board Vice President, where we deployed 200 air quality monitoring sensors throughout the city so that you can find real time what your air quality is like. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. All right, we're going to go into our curated questions. And first up is Katrina.
Thanks, Michael. Our first question is for all the candidates. Do you believe the time has come for the city to think differently about transportation? And if so, what do you see yourself doing if elected to change things? For this question, we'll start with Greg.
Hi, Katrina. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So I do. And I think that one of the keys is that we've got to stop looking at programs as sort of boutique new programs and instead overlay safety and walkability as crucial and complete streets amenities as functions of our work, not as side projects or side programs that are essentially competing for funds. That's what ends up happening in the budget process in the city, and I've been through almost 8 budgets. Is when you have a program, it ends up competing with others for projects. I think another element that has got to change is we need to be looking at equity. There are so many folks. We have more folks living under the poverty line using Metro than any other, proportionately than any other city in the United States using their public transit system. We got to apply equity to what we do.
Thank you. And Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to think differently about it. And that starts with getting people out of their cars. One of the easiest ways to get people out of cars is to make your community more livable. There's a very interesting initiative going around, or idea going around, called the Livable Communities Initiative, which talks about making our housing more part of a small integrated 15-minute neighborhood that allows us to not have to get into cars to do things in our daily life. Another way we can do that on a more systemic level, again, as I said before, was adaptive reuse of our commercial office corridors, whether that's the Wilshire Corridor, Century City, Westwood, parts of Olympic, Sepulveda, Sawtell. What we can do is take those office spaces, which will never be fully occupied again, based on hybrid work situations that we've seen since COVID, and instead repurpose those as housing. That helps solve our housing process, and it also creates a livable community that people can walk in and get out of their cars.
All right, thank you. And next is Allison.
Thank you. Yes, the time has come for this city to think differently about transportation. We need to focus on better transportation, safety, pedestrianism, beautification, helping small businesses, and we have to fix the bureaucracy. I'm known as the fixer uniquely for cutting through red tape to get projects done. And Michael, I feel for you with those staggering statistics of what was promised and where we are right now. And that really is unacceptable. Caltrans, Streets for LA DOT need to work all together. We have to secure grants from every level of government. And we need to prioritize changing our streets to include the mobility plan, not as the default and not as the exception. That is important. We have to explore options of creating new departments to centralize transit, streets, and bikes. And we have to have a citywide approach. And that's my skill set of bringing people together. I have 3 children. They're 24. They're really not children anymore. 24, 26, and 28. My daughter's an environmental scientist. She lives in Amsterdam. We've seen what the livable communities
Thank
can
you, Allison.
Inspiring. Thank you.
Next, finally, is Erin.
Yes, the city definitely has to change. The status quo is not working as it comes to housing and to transportation. To get people out of cars, they need to see that bus lanes are faster. Bus-only lanes that would zoom by cars sitting in traffic is one way to do that. We need to also, there's an equity component. The majority of people who take public transit currently are women, and we need to address safety issues, everything from lighting, but also to intra-west side travel, transit that's been oriented just to get folks from the west side to downtown, which benefits 9 to 5 commuters, and not folks who are predominantly women who do things like, say childcare or, chores within the west side, with travel on the west side that is not just about getting to downtown. But overall, I think it's also about creating a city where transit-oriented development means that people are living closer to mass transit, and that also that the footprint of the city is more walkable with more bike lanes. And it's just really reimagining what a city block looks like.
All right, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Taranig for the next question.
Are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm waiting for the question. What transportation and street space ideas or changes would you promote in CD 11? Feel free to list specific streets or projects.
Very good. So specifically what we need to work on in CD 11 would be, one of our great streets was Venice, obviously, and there's been a difficulty with implementation of it through the Mar Vista area. Obviously, I think we need to just re-examine how we're doing the parking vis-a-vis the bike lanes. And I think we also need to paint those bike lanes green because they're a little difficult to use right now, and they're a little difficult to park. I think number two is we have to look at some of our wider streets like Lincoln, and obviously we have some of these plans in place, but in terms of getting public transportation running down the center of those and implementing a system whereby it's easier to get from the 10 down all the way into Marina Del Rey, that's obviously extremely problematic as well. I think the other thing we have to look at is making sure that we are actually connecting the subway system in order to actually service all the areas on the west side. We've got to finish the Green Line all the way down to LAX, and we've got to make sure that we get the project through Century City and through Westwood done quickly.
Thank you. Allison?
Sure. So I have many ideas. I won't be able to get them all in the 2 minutes, but I definitely support the Livable Communities Initiative to bring that forward. Back in November, when I entered this race, I wrote on my website that we have to decrease our carbon footprint and we have to decrease congestion. And the way to do that was mixed use. And then to my surprise, a group of planners, architects and engineers and developers had already come up with this concept of Livable Communities Initiative, which is building along the major corridors to have complete streets with trees, benches, parklets. That would be part of the plan, protected bike and bus lanes, outdoor dining. And I am the one to streamline the process. That's what I did at LA Unified, overseeing 150 schools and facilities with 10,000 properties. We also need to increase the frequency of buses and make sure that they're clean. I agree, Venice Boulevard could be an area where we could make great strides. We also have San Vicente, Pico, Sawtell, Santa Monica, and the Expo and the Bundy. So we need more crosswalks and we need hybrid pedestrian beacons. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Erin is next.
Yes, so I used to actually commute from Venice to downtown on a bicycle down Venice Boulevard, and it was completely fraught. So we definitely need to address Venice Boulevard, as also Lincoln. We do that not just by putting green paint, but actually having protected bike lanes, but also positioning parking so that you could have where the cars are going, then parking, and then a bicycle lane so that there's a built-in buffer. And then that's so basically protected bike lanes. But we also need to have interlinking bike lanes so that it's not just you're just going on a road to nowhere, but the bike lanes that are existing throughout the city connect with each other so that people can get to their destination safer and faster. We also need to, of course, the metro lines need to be connected, but also interlinking first mile and last mile so that people can go door to door to mass transit easier. So that includes a shuttle system and more bus lines, but also quicker bus lines by increasing travel time. And then also where we're organizing the transit-oriented development.
Thank you, Erin. And Greg Good.
Yeah, thanks for the question. A couple of key priorities that I would have would be one, addressing safe routes to schools. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. Increasing the use of speed bumps on local streets around schools, and potentially in situations where you have collector streets. Those are sort of the connectors to local neighborhood streets and arterial streets. Speed bumps and elevated crosswalks to ensure that that more kids have better access to safe routes. And then even in looking at potential slow streets in some of the local street neighborhoods around schools, at least during the week on school days. The other thing I'd like to do is really enhance walkability, and that means applying great streets amenities to major thoroughfares or major commercial corridors to align also with housing development and my priorities there. That could be Lincoln, that could be Sepulveda, that can be a lot of different key areas around the city to make walking, or around the district, to make walking more appealing and safer.
Thank you. Next up is Josh.
Thanks, Michael. So my question is, will you let LADOT and Metro implement the mobility plan's bus lanes, even if it comes at the expense of car space? In CD11, this includes bus lanes on Venice Boulevard, Sepulveda Boulevard, Santa Monica Boulevard, and Lincoln Boulevard, along with keeping the ones already implemented on Wilshire. And we're going to start with you, Allison.
Thank you. My answer is yes. And I would definitely want to have a lot of input from the community, because that's critical that we engage the community. to have them have a clear understanding of how this will decrease congestion. Bus lanes usually come at the expense of parking, not traffic. And that's a concept that people need to understand. We need to reduce congestion because that's getting people out of their cars. And actually businesses will get more business because the buses will keep the customers coming rather than traffic, which is a deterrent for customers from coming to businesses. We have low ridership, which means we need to advertise this and we need to make sure that people understand that riding these buses will be safe, and we'll have to ensure that they will be clean. So I believe there'll be we'll need to do a major PR program to ensure that it's a success. And we need to make sure that we absolutely engage the community. But of the streets that you just mentioned, I mentioned earlier. And again, if we wrap that around the Livable Communities Initiative concept, where we have those 20-minute walkable cities.
Thank you. Thanks, Allison.
Erin, you're next.
Oh, thank you. The answer is yes, for sure. We need to create the infrastructure to get people out of their cars and incentivize bus riding. And that means allowing the bus to actually be faster, oftentimes in congested places. And I would also point out that when doing this, it's not just about kind of public engagement for the sake of just educating, but also really having neighbor input on design. I think the design of what they're an updated street leads to community buy-in, so that people actually want engage with what's new, and it doesn't feel like it's coming from up above. But at the end of the day, this is about infrastructure, and for places to be more walkable, it needs to allow for things other than cars to be in the space. And so I think the bus only lanes have to come in conjunction also with bicycle lanes and beautification, and also for businesses, for business buy-in, also kind of business corridors for outdoor business places.
Thanks, Erin. Greg, you're up.
Thanks. Yeah, I also would support, but I would preface it with this: there's got to be, and I feel like we're all in agreement on this. Got to be some really robust community engagement. It's absolutely crucial, and again, that's also not about setting it up for rejection. That's about engagement with stakeholders that are going to be impacted. You got to have that crucial community engagement and stakeholder process. But with that said, I think that dedicated bus lanes are crucial, again, in terms of equity. The largest users of our buses are women, and they are people of lower incomes. And then I think it's just a traffic issue. I mean, the reality is we can make buses faster, more people are going to use them, and we're going to have more folks getting out of their cars. And so, yeah, I would support.
Thanks, Greg. Mike, I think you're last.
Well, look, everybody agrees, and it's just a fact. It is going to come at the expense of car lanes, but that's okay. What we have to do, both from a transportation standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and a livability standpoint, is to get people out of their cars more often. And how do we do that at the end of the day? Bus lanes, bike lanes. We need to beautify our streets so that they're more walkable. We need to add additional trees. We need to add additional service areas, et cetera, places for people to sit. But on top of that, we keep coming back to what I think is the main, which is the main cog in this wheel, which is whether it's the Livable Communities Initiative when you're looking at small areas and town-like streets, or whether we're looking at adaptive reuse of our commercial office corridors. We need to bring the housing to the area that already has retail use, that already has commercial use, and will allow people to live most of their lives in their community within a few blocks of themselves for their needs, and not have to get into their car for basic services.
Thank you, guys. I think I am next. So I want to talk about Vista Del Mar. In 2017, a 16-year-old girl was killed trying to cross the street, and the city paid out a $9.5 million wrongful death claim. And in response, LADOT removed 2 traffic lanes and put in crosswalks, and with the extra space they had, bike lanes. There was a huge outcry, as some of you may remember, and ultimately the mayor instructed LADOT to reverse the changes. 6 months ago, another woman trying to cross street with her son, was killed. If elected, will you reinstate the safety improvements that were so controversial on Vista Del Mar that the city removed? And where do you draw the line between safety for those outside cars and driver convenience? And for this one, we're going to start with Erin.
Yes, so the answer is yes to putting those safety improvements back. Look, I think at the end of the day, this cannot be a pedestrian versus car. It's about what kind of city we want to live in. And the status quo is not working as it comes to commute times, and the status quo is not working as it relates to pedestrian and bicycle riders' deaths. So these things are about convenience and safety. And so what does that look like? It's protected bike lanes, it's safety improvements on walkway streets, on walkways and crossing streets. And the city has a plan, it's about implementing it. And yes, there's pushback oftentimes, but that's because people don't see another alternative. And so it's not just about taking away things, but creating an alternative so that when safety is implemented, it's that people see that there's other alternatives. For instance, bicycle lanes or interconnected shuttle lanes that get people to metro lines, and really something to beautify the street, not something to slow down your commute.
Thank you. Greg?
I think anytime, thanks, Michael. I think anytime we have a tragedy like that, and that is awful, we've got to reassess and bring folks together and really evaluate what was changed and what is possible to rectify that situation and to simply put, make it safer. I think we got to commit to the premise that as Erin said, that it's not an either or proposition, that we can actually get to safety and do the things that are necessary while also working with all the stakeholders in terms of the day-to-day elements on the streets. And so I think you got to really bring folks together on this and do an assessment on what's actually necessary to make it safe, and come up with a shared action plan to get there.
Yeah, I don't think the solution to avoiding similar tragedies like this is simply to go back to what we did last time, which was in the end roundly rejected by the community. I think what the solution is to actually implement the plan as it was designed. As those who followed this closely, and I was one of them, one of the biggest problems with that plan and why it was doomed to be reversed, once the political pressure was put on Mike Bond and on the mayor, was because the proper outlets to reroute people to freeways and to other larger corridors, as opposed to through people's neighborhoods, that part of the plan wasn't implemented. You had a partial implementation of a plan, which rendered it ineffective and turned what would have been a useful change into a traffic nightmare. So what we need to make sure we're doing is revisiting the issue, talking to community stakeholders about it, and then when you come up with the plan, actually implementing the entire plan, not just parts of it.
Thank you. Allison? You're on mute.
I just wanted to say that it is an absolute tragedy that a young woman lost her life, and then 6 months after the safety precautions were taken down, another individual lost their life. That said, I do agree that we need to look at this through a fresh set of eyes, because the community did backlash because it occurred suddenly and it caused gridlock. So we need to make sure that that plan is fully implemented and ensure that those outlets are there so that there isn't the same exact uprising as there was before. I believe that's critical. And this is something that is in my wheelhouse that I've done by working with LA Unified. I've had to deal with homeowners organizations constantly with improvements that we've made at our schools, whether it be a tennis court at Mark Twain that the community was up in arms about and now they're happy with. We're able to expedite that by sitting down, understanding what the concerns were, and accommodating. So thank you very much.
Next up, Kyle.
Thank you, Michael. Hey, everybody, I'm Kyle. steering committee member and CD11 resident. So this is exciting for me. So we've touched on this a little bit in some of your answers, but we have to ask this specifically. Will you commit to implementing a network of safe, physically protected bike lanes in CD11, even if car space has to be taken away to make room? Per the city's mobility plan, this includes a lot of our major streets, protected bike lanes on Imperial, Westchester, Sepulveda, Centinela, Inglewood, Venice, Washington, Ohio, San Vicente, and regular bike lanes on Barrington, Lincoln, La Tijera, Culver Boulevard, and Pershing. And we'll start with Greg.
Thanks, Kyle. I commit to exploring the protected bike lanes, but that's going to have to come with a community process. It's going to have to come with a stakeholder process. That's important on a couple of different levels. The community surrounding it, the small businesses, the neighbors, the neighborhoods are going to be those most directly impacted, and they need to have a participatory role in this process. Two, if they reject it, then we go backwards anyway. And so there's got to be that kind of process, but it's a process that I commit to and looking at and exploring with the community and with everybody. I also think it's important to note that the mobility plan is not a directive. The mobility plan is not a project delivery plan. It is a policy framework, and it is never presupposed that that framework would be implemented absent community engagement. That is a presupposition of that it will be. And so I think that that's important.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Well, I think we have to be very careful about overthinking projects. Community input is extremely important, I agree, but we've obviously had a mobility plan for 7 years now, and almost none of it has been implemented. While it may be a policy framework, it was obviously debated, discussed, and subject to a lot of public opinion and input before it came in. I think 100% we need to go ahead and implement the framework and put in protected bike lanes in CD11 on all of those locations. Now, obviously, where the community input comes into it is how exactly they should be situated, how exactly parking should be handled. Is it going to be parallel? Is it diagonal in certain places? What should bollards look like? How should parking meters be structured? How wide should the lanes be? And what should be allowed in the bike lanes? That's all, no doubt. Those are issues that have to be looked at on a community by community basis. But in terms of putting in the protected bike lanes, as envisioned, 100%. We've got to do everything we can to get folks out of cars.
Thank you. Allison? Mute. You're on mute.
Okay, sorry. It was telling me that I couldn't be unmuted, but now I am. I appreciate that. I will commit to implement a network of safe and physically protected bike lanes in District 11. Bike riders absolutely need protection. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I actually have 3 friends who have been hit by cars, cyclist friends. One lost their life. Another was a parent of a child in elementary school with one of my sons who is still in a vegetative state. And we have to have safer lanes for our bicyclists, and we do need to decrease our carbon footprint, and we do need to decrease the congestion in the city. And all of that said, I agree, we have to have community input. It's vital to get that understanding. For example, Michael, you brought something up that I had no idea of. I did not realize that there's an increase in domestic abuse because of congestion. That's a staggering statistic that I think the public should know about. I also would be data-driven. So that is along the major corridors. If we add a bike lane, what's that going to look like? Is some other real estate we can take over? Thank you.
Thank you. Erin?
Yes. To answer the question, yes, this does need to be implemented. If 3% of the city's mobility plan has been implemented, it's not a reality. We need to make it a reality. And of course, community involvement is key as to design and the how. But at the end of the day, we need to make it possible for people to get out of cars. And that includes bicycles. And at the end of the day, it also means making commute times faster by these alternatives. As it relates to bicycle lanes, though, it also means for safety. There's an article called The Curb Cut Effect in Stanford Social Innovation Review. And effectively, it means a curb cut, for instance, for disability access, also benefits people who are, pushing a pram or doing to have a stroller or anything like that. And so it's an equity issue. And the more equitable a street is, then there are more folks that are on it, and the safer the street is. And so we need people to basically be on the streets, and that includes bicycle lanes, and that includes protected bicycle lanes. And we already have the plan. It's about implementing it.
Thank you. Over to Adrian.
Thank you. Would you expand Venice Boulevard's Great Street further east and west from Mar Vista? On the mobility plan, Venice Boulevard includes protected bike lanes and dedicated bus lanes from the 405 to the ocean. And we will start with Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana. Appreciate it. Yeah, I absolutely think that we need to look at certain areas for extension. Right now, one of the problems you have with extending it all the way to the beach and all the way to the 405 is that we don't have the business concentration that we have in the areas of Mar Vista where we have implemented the plan. Having said all that, what I think can be a great tool towards revitalizing businesses in communities is by putting in this type of infrastructure to attract more people to use those businesses. But I think part of what we have to do at the same time or before it is get more of that stretch of Venice into commercial and retail use, because it isn't right now. And simply doing that without those uses would be counterproductive. So I want to look at those two things in tandem by encouraging people to open more retail and commercial establishments so that we can look at extending it.
Okay, Allison, you're next.
Okay, I'm not mute. I would say I absolutely would want to look at that plan and the extension of it. I agree that it's successful in the commercial corridors. We also have Venice High and some other issues that we would need to address there as well. I know a lot of kids take their bikes there as well, and there's a lot of buses that go. So I think, again, this would be digging deep for community engagement and digging deep on the data to make sure that this is something that the community would not protest against when they can understand how this could be a benefit. And I would also wonder if some areas are residential, what that would look like exactly, and to make sure that we've chatted with those folks to make sure that they're on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Erin, you're up next.
Yes, so I've lived blocks from Venice Boulevard my entire life, other than college and law school. I've gone down Venice Boulevard on a bicycle for decades, and we have to make it safe. And protected bike lanes are the way to do it. We got to get people out of their cars, especially on a hot summer day when people are streaming down Venice Boulevard. A dedicated bus lane could also help do that. And this is reimagining what the city street looks like. And there's so much urban planning that has gone behind this. The mobility plan took years to make. And so, yeah, it needs to be implemented. But yes, it also has to come with the re-envisioning of affordable housing. So with transit-oriented development, this also connects to, if we're going to be building up, we have to be building affordable, and we have to be building near metro lines and bus lines. And then also having, commercial density near these places where there's going to be more affordable housing. But yeah, I really look forward to having a protected bicycle lane down Venice Boulevard.
And Greg, you're next.
Thank you. So what I'd like to look at with the Venice Boulevard Great Street is almost rethink, Great Streets is, again, this sort of other. What really Great Streets should be thought of as complete streets. And I would like to see complete streets elements extended as far up and down Venice as possible. That is shade structures, that is street furniture, that is green infrastructure like bioswales, that is more tree canopy. There's pockets of Venice Boulevard that do not have adequate canopy or shade. And then increasing bus stops and making sure that all those bus stops have shade. That could and should happen up and down Venice Boulevard. And by the way, I'd also going to say, look forward to helping to accelerate Complete Street, artist formerly known as Great Street, amenities on Centinela as well through Del Rey. And then I would very much want to focus on dedicated bus lanes, because I think that that's going to be crucial.
Olga, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Metro is currently studying congestion pricing. For example, having a toll to enter downtown LA or along the 405 between the valley and the city. And places around the world have implemented it. Vehicle miles traveled have fallen. Even you could be appointed to the Metro board. Do you support congestion pricing in Los Angeles? We'll start with you, Allison.
Sure. So I think as a pilot, it's a really interesting concept. And the issue that I might have with that is the matter of equity, right? Because someone who has greater means is going to fare much higher. This is a concept to alleviate some of the congestion that we have along the Sunset Corridor, for example, that is virtually impossible and people are trapped in their houses. It's actually a hazard for folks right now who are in their homes during certain parts of rush hour along Sunset, because they simply cannot get out of their house and you can't get an ambulance up to their home because it's literally gridlocked. So I'm open to that. But with, I guess, a big heart for those that can't afford this type of thing, and to make sure that people who qualify, for example, for free and reduced lunch, like we had at LA Unified, that they might be given a pass. Thank you.
Erin, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I have equity concerns. Even if it's, first of all, gas prices are incentivizing people to get onto public transit now. And we need to create the infrastructure that public transit is faster and not just, it's just easier to use. But, the idea of congestion pricing, where someone who could shrug at $20 stays in their car, and someone who's $20 is more than what they make in an hour doesn't. I mean, I do have equity concerns. With that said, I think it's about incentivizing, people to take mass transit. Everything from, requiring any public employer to incentivize private employers as well. And then also, at the end of the day, I think it's about creating an infrastructure that allows people to do this, not making it punitive for people who can't do it, can't afford it.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I at the risk of being redundant, I share the equity concerns. I worry that a city that is already sort of atomized economically in so many ways could risk becoming further so. I also think there's significant concerns around developing and paying for the not insignificant infrastructure around a congestion pricing system. I mean, that is not it's a very complex process. I know that there have been studies that suggest that it would eventually pay for itself, but there's a significant upfront capital outlay. So we better know, if we're going to do it, that we're really ready to do it. But again, I would absolutely reject it if there wasn't a full accounting for equity. But we're also in a crisis and we need to look at everything. So I would say, let's look at it and understand the implications.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. One of the best parts about going last is you don't have to repeat what everybody agrees on, which is the equity component of it, which is problematic. But I would say that that can be easily enough dealt with based on a merit system or based on an income system. The reason why I oppose it is LA is just not geographically amenable to the success that congestion pricing has had elsewhere. It's been successful in New York City. It's been successful in London, Stockholm, Singapore. You have very densely populated smaller urban areas, and congestion pricing was used when you entered those areas. We don't have areas like that in Los Angeles. Trying to alleviate neighborhood by neighborhood issues such as Sunset Boulevard or other areas we've talked about are just simply, in my opinion, not going to be amenable to congestion pricing. I just don't, I think it's a square peg in a round hole in this situation.
Thank you, everybody. So we're now going to go to audience questions. Just a reminder, and by the way, I apologize for these mysterious gray boxes. It's the Zoom controls. I don't know what's going on, but the link is in the chat to both ask questions and vote on others. And we'll see how many we can get through. So you can have up to 1 minute. Feel free to take less time if you don't need the full 1 minute. So first up, do you support fare-free transit, public transit in Los Angeles, fare-free buses and trains? We'll start with Erin.
Yes, I do. I think, you know, we need to incentivize people to take mass transit, and fare is one of them. And I also think there's a big equity issue on the metro where there's no ticket that's required to enter. It's just the enforcement when you don't have a ticket, which oftentimes leads to poor and working people of color being targeted by law enforcement. I've seen that when I used to commute from MacArthur Park to downtown to get to court when I worked at Eviction Defense Network. So yeah, I think it should be free. And I think we need to make it as easy as possible to get into mass transit. It's already free for LAUSD students, and we've seen that this has succeeded. And so not only do we want as many people on for traffic purposes, but also for safety purposes. Mass transit is safer when it's being used by a lot of people. And I also would say that this is not just a poor people's issue. The New York City subway is used by all classes of people. A billionaire mayor will take the subway. And a free transit actually helps everyone use it, and it becomes just more daily life oriented.
Thank you. Greg?
Hi, yeah, thanks. I am very, very open to and supportive of fareless transit. I mean, there is every incentive to get folks on, and the folks who would benefit the most are the folks who need it the most. And so, and the other piece is that you know, we have a very difficult time with our existing infrastructure, even collecting fares successfully anyway. And so, yeah, I would support expanding what we're doing and working towards fare-free transit.
Mike?
Yeah, I think we have to look at it from a common sense standpoint. The reason why people aren't using public transportation as a whole is not because it's too expensive. And for people who it is too expensive for, we should have a very simple system to go ahead and get yourself a free pass. It should be free to anybody who even shows a minimal economic need for it. It should be handed out easily, but it shouldn't just be free for everyone, because there are plenty of people who would use transportation that could well pay for it. And that should help to work to alleviate taxpayer use of dollars. So I wouldn't just have it free across the board. But what we really need to look at here is making public transportation more attractive. And to do that, we need more routes. We need more dedicated bus lanes. We need buses to be on time. We need them to be clean and safe. And we need our metros to actually connect to each other so that you can use public transportation for the practical purposes you need. Until we do that, even a free system will not be used by most ridership.
Allison?
Sure. So in this particular case, I don't think it's a pricing issue. I think it's a safety issue and a cleanliness issue. And thrilled that the students of LA Unified were able to get free fares. I have talked to the head of the Metro, who's very concerned about just giving a green light to free fares across the board because we have not taken care of our homelessness crisis. And he actually hypothesized that under these circumstances, you may have the unhoused individuals staying on the Metro 24/7. And so that's something that the city needs to work on. I have a plan. You can go to AllisonForLA.com and see an elaborate plan on that. I would say for the moment, absolutely anyone who qualifies should get a free fare. And that would definitely incentivize people to be taking the Metro. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try showing the questions on the screen. You guys are doing pretty well on time, but if I cut you off, I apologize. Let's see if this works. Next question, do you ever commute by bike or public transit? And when is the last time you took public transit in LA? And for this question, Greg, you're going to go first.
I do not commute currently. I take it, I'm a candidate at this point, so I don't go downtown anymore. But before that, simply put, it was I explored every route. I was going from Del Rey to downtown every day, and explored the routes. And simply put, it would take me double the time that it took me, unfortunately, in my car. The last time I took public transit was going, I believe, to a football game during the fall. And I would also say that, fortunately, I ended up, I got engaged and met my wife on public transit. So I am proud of that. And I do love it. And the more we expand it, the more we'll be able to get on there.
Michael, is that me next?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you cut off there. I do not commute to work by bike or public transit, but I bike a lot where I live in Venice because it's very amenable to it. And I take public transportation a lot for two reasons. Either if I'm going downtown or to USC, the train works very well for that, and I use it. Although it's not the easiest thing to get to and to get off of and get back to where you're going. We have to work on those connections. Number two, I do take buses around Santa Monica, Venice, Culver City quite a bit with my kids also. They're pretty easy to hop on and off locally around where I live. But again, a lot of that comes down to the fact that Venice, in comparison to a lot of places, is a small community. It's almost default a livable community where it's very easy to ride a skateboard down to the beach. And then if you're tired with your kids, you pop on the number one, you pop back over down Washington by my house. It's very easy to do. It's much more difficult to do that if I were trying to get to my office in Century City or trying to go to Westwood. And those gaps are what
Thanks,
we have
Mike.
to fill.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Allison.
Sure. So I've taken the train, metro multiple times to downtown for events like the Women's March, or, it's a great thing to have going from west to east when you are concerned about congestion and traffic. I ride my bike a lot. Again, I clarified that I'm along the beach path because of safety primarily, but I'll ride my bike around town. My son actually rides his bike from Highland Park to the west, which scares the heck out of me because exactly what you're doing, Michael, which is trying to make things safer. But I'll find myself down in Redondo Beach along the beach path here and there. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Erin.
I took public bus from my public middle school. I took a public bus from my public high school. I used to bicycle the first 5 years as a lawyer from Venice to MacArthur Park, Venice to Koreatown. Even then, once I got to work, I would take the metro on the purple line or the red line into downtown LA. Even as late as just a few months before the pandemic, I would take it from my office in Koreatown into downtown LA. The only thing that stopped me from taking public transit in LA has been COVID. I haven't taken it since COVID. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think we need more to defend public institutions and to have more people in office who use public institutions, including public transportation.
Thank you. So this will be our order. Mike will start on this question. This is around parking. Will you commit to ending parking minimums? Go ahead, Mike.
To ending parking minimums, can you explain that a little more?
Sure. In the city of Los Angeles, depending on what kind of business or residential complex you're building, the city
you mean for
requires
development? Okay, now I understand
Yes.
what you're saying. Now you're talking about parking requirements in development.
Yes,
Okay,
in residential and commercial buildings.
Gotcha. Well, it's too blanket of a question to ask and answer. I don't think anybody could or should commit to completely ending parking minimums. In certain neighborhoods, in certain areas, I think we should look at downward trending them, or in some situations, eliminating them. There's been a lot of talk about the Livable Communities Initiative today, which I am a big fan of. And part of that platform is down zoning or eliminating parking requirements for certain housing developments. In those situations, in those neighborhoods, I'd support it 100%. In other areas, it's not appropriate because you have such traffic and you need to have people parked. So it depends where you are.
Allison.
I would not blanketly eliminate parking minimums. I think that could be problematic in our high fire areas, in areas that are congested where people are car dependent, for example. I do believe, and I think the Livable Communities Initiatives addresses this very well. When you build affordable housing, workforce housing along those major corridors that we've talked about, streets like Pico, and these folks who are buying homes between 25 and 35-year-olds, your first year firefighter, plumber, et cetera, a lot of these people that I've interviewed, they don't want to be car dependent. So in that particular case, parking minimums are not appropriate. But as I mentioned, in other situations where you have congested areas, high fire prone areas, it doesn't make a lot of sense to completely eliminate parking minimums. Now, gradually, as people become less car dependent, and as we as a city improve mass transit and our train system, those minimums can go down. Thank you.
Thank you. Erin.
So it's my understanding that parking often adds up to like 70 to 90,000 to a unit when things are being developed. So there's an affordable housing component. Also, when we're thinking about denser living, safer, slower streets, getting people out of cars, it also means then having smaller units and also no parking associated with it to create more and denser units that are in a more walkable place. So I think there's definitely places that where development is going to have that kind of infill. It totally makes sense. I think as a blanket throughout the city of LA, I would not, but I think when we're focusing on infill of transit-oriented development, where we're building up, not out, closer to mass transit, this is what makes sense because, yeah, it's about lowering the cost of the development to make these, at the end of the day, making these places more affordable. And so, but the ending of the parking minimums in certain places would have to be also then creating real affordability, people below say 50% AMI.
Thanks, Aaron. Greg?
Yeah, thanks. I think that this is a great example of where we need more flexibility in planning. I don't think that we can end parking minimums across the board. I do think we need to be very intentional and targeted in identifying those places where the parking minimums are antiquated and actually do increase costs unnecessarily and frankly, create an abundance of parking that's not necessary. And specifically, I do think neighborhoods like transit-oriented development neighborhoods and where we're looking for more density, we absolutely should. I think you could even get to a point where you could have, no parking minimums in certain communities based on the landscape that's being developed and evolved there. And that also includes walkability and ensuring that there's walkability elements and amenities there as well. So not across the board, but absolutely something we need to look at on a project by project basis and potentially a neighborhood by neighborhood basis.
Thank you. All right. I think we have at least time for a couple more. Allison, you'll go first on this one. Give me 1 second to pull up the question. Community engagement has often been used as a way of stopping projects from going through, and the people who most rely on the services such as transit don't have the time or ability to engage. How would you broaden the way we gather that feedback and engage more people and keep the project from being stopped altogether? And we'll start with Allison.
Great question. Whoever out there in the audience asked it, I love it. what this is the silver lining to the pandemic, honestly and truly. When I worked for the school board member, community engagement was one of my roles and responsibility. And we literally had 150 schools. Probably the most people we ever had attend a meeting was maybe 100 in a auditorium. Through the Zoom community engagement, we had 1,200 people at a time. And I think I would definitely go the route of meeting people where they are, making sure they have the tech and the Wi-Fi, but you can have massive meetings. And then if you want to break it out into focus groups, which is what we would do and honestly, during the pandemic, it was a hectic time, but that's exactly what I would do. And make sure that you're giving that loop of feedback. This is what we heard. We're taking it back to analyze it. And then you meet again. This is what we heard. This is what our plans are. And usually you have to have, 4 or 5 focus groups and
Thanks, Allison.
information back. Thank you.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, look, this is where local leadership really matters. This is about telling a community, this is our idea, but what are your ideas? But this is why it can work for you. And so we've seen this in affordable housing where, people say, oh, not in my backyard because, I have concern with, say, poor people moving in. So it can't just be local control that ending things that benefit all of us. With that said, it has to be local engagement so that everyone feels invested in something that moves the status quo along. And so what does that mean? I think that's taking a community organizing approach, basically selling something on the benefits of it, being honest about, the short-term costs, the inconvenience of the construction, but at the end of the day that we all benefit from these things. And that really, it's not just Zoom meetings and having town hall forums, but also addressing misinformation that happens oftentimes on social media and really having a fact-based, data-based approach to say, no, this is going to impact you in a lot of ways, in a good way, but also how it impacts all of us, from safety, people on the streets, et cetera.
Thank you. Greg?
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Austin. Look, I think the concept of community engagement often gets, if you'll forgive the phrase, thrown under the bus unnecessarily. I think it's absolutely critical that we take it really seriously, because whoever gets elected to this seat and the city in general doesn't always have it right. And so the community engagement process is not about obstruction. It's actually about ideas. It's about a real marketplace of ideas and real reciprocal feedback. That said, I think you've got to be intentional and methodical. And I've done this as a living in the past, and I would do it like this as a council member. And that is identifying and constantly working to build coterie of community organizations, your neighborhood councils, your BIDs, your realtor associations, as well as individual leaders and influencers and different groups that represent diverse backgrounds of all sorts, and bringing them together and actually being relentless in getting them engaged.
Thank you.
You stopped showing us the minute, Michael.
I apologize. I can't do both, but I thought showing the questions might be a little better.
No worries.
Mike, you're on mute now.
Yeah, see, now I'm making mistakes here. Having spent the last 20 years, running the Venice Neighborhood Council, and then the West Side Regional Alliance of Councils after that, and then the Planning Commission for West LA for the last 6 years, I've obviously run a lot of these meetings over the years. And the problem has always been that it's so tough to get to them. It's so tough to make the time coming or going. They're always at times that are tough on your family, your work, what have you. Allison made a great point, and I agree 100%. Having Zoom be a necessary and required component of all community meetings will be great. Look, I've been to 1 million candidate debates over the years, and there's always 50 people there. Every debate we've had in CD11 so far has been 250, 300, 400, 500 people, most of whom are on Zoom. It's just easier. We got to make sure we're doing meetings as a hybrid as we now come out of things. You can go in person if you'd like, if you're a tangible person, but everything should be hybridized on Zoom. The other thing is the council office themselves has to host as many meetings as possible. Leaving it only to community groups puts too much burden on other people.
Thanks, Mike.
Who have jobs and families. So let's do it from the council office.
Thank you. All right. Give me 1 second. I apologize. I'm juggling 3 screens. Almost there. Okay, Erin, you'll go first on this one. Let me pull up the question. Policing on Metro has often been done at the expense of Black riders who make up less than 18% of ridership, but are the subject of 50 to 60% of arrests and police interaction. What methods will you support to reduce this racially biased policing, such as urging an end to fair enforcement? Erin, you're up. And you are on mute.
I'm really glad you guys are asking this question. So I'm a civil rights lawyer. I've sued law enforcement for civil rights violations. And look, anti-Black racism is endemic to this country. It's way too common in Los Angeles. And this is why, to the earlier question, I said all public transportation should be free, because fair enforcement right now is the way that fares are even collected, and it comes at the targeting of young people of color, particularly Black folks. And so the easiest answer is yes, stopping fair enforcement by making mass transit free, because we want people on mass transit. But then overall, we have to also look at addressing systemic racism in policing and anti-Black racism. And that's, I mean, I cannot even begin to start on that. But at the end of the day, it means focusing on things that support life and not spending our budget on hiring more LAPD officers.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and thanks for the question. There's no doubt the history of policing in this country is fraught and has disproportionately impacted communities of color, particularly Black and brown folks. And so I think that making sure that we safeguard against that in any way possible by working collaboratively, first of all, with police who are on the street and police who are on our transit system is crucial. And that's got to be a collaborative endeavor. But two, I also believe that your biggest challenge there is often on fair enforcement. That's the single most common interaction. And I do support moving towards a fare free transit system.
Thank you. Mike?
Well, I think it's two answers. One is training. We need to keep working like we've been doing towards eliminating this kind of bias and eliminating any kind of profiling from any sort of police work. And I think that we all agree we're dedicated to doing that. And I think a lot of strides have been made lately, but we need to make a lot more. Number two is we shouldn't be policing this by selective enforcement. What we should be doing is having gates where a person pays and goes through to get on transit, or they use their pass, which allows them to get on for free. Again, I think it should be a very liberal system for how you can get a free public transit pass, but it should not be blanket, because plenty of people that hopefully will be using it can well afford to pay it, and they should, in order to maximize tax dollars. But again, let's go away from forcing anybody to have to check fares. Let's just go ahead like most cities and pay our fare or use our free pass, and then there's no issue on this anymore.
Thank you. Allison?
So I think an automated system would eliminate any of the systemic racism that we're talking about and profiling. And that is something that I've done firsthand at LA Unified. We did not have an automated system with leasing our 1,400 schools. You actually had to have a cashier's check, like a drug dealer, and you had to know that a soccer field was available. These are things that we can bring, the system in the 21st century in short order. I also think as we decrease fares, this will not become an issue. I absolutely think there should be zero tolerance for any type of selective enforcement, and we need to work more with community policing. We need to work with LAPD and have an enormous amount of training to eliminate any type of systemic racism and also any profiling. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll see if we can get two more questions. We can definitely get one more in. Greg, you'll be first on this one. I think it's kind of a fun question. And I will preface this by saying that 3rd Street Promenade is one of the most popular parts of Santa Monica and contributes about 1/5 of its tax revenues. So we don't really have plazas in this town, but what areas of CD11 do you think would be a good car-free zone? And what will you do to create car-free zones in CD11? We'll start with Greg.
Well, I'm not sure. But what I would say is that I'm certainly a fan of the promenade in certain car-free zones. And I think it merits exploring. I think that, you know, at the risk of being redundant, that would be a community process to really look at places where it's not going to essentially create just sort of a congestion nightmare around it. And by the way, you also have to have incredible buy-in. I'm not going to put a street out there right now without you know, being able to talk to the businesses that would be impacted, the neighborhoods that would be impacted. But it is a compelling idea, and I would certainly be interested in exploring it. And it could be a real economic, boon depending on the situation and what we're talking about.
Thank you. Mike?
I mean, first and foremost, Abbot Kinney in Venice for sure. I also think Windward Plaza, if we're looking at Venice down at the beach, and there are actually several streets. If you're looking at North Venice, which dead end into the beach, there are several areas there that it would not only improve the businesses there and the walkability, but it would really create a very fun vibe. And those are areas that you don't really need to access Speedway. So that's the easiest way to do it. One that's maybe a little more controversial, but I'd like to look into it, is at least part of Westwood Boulevard. That's not in CD11, obviously, it goes over into 5 there, but it's that type of concept that we can look at in similar areas, I think, over in Brentwood and over into the Palisades. I think in particular, if you look at where the Brentwood Country Mart is, that would be an interesting area to close down. There are other routes to get up to San Vicente and to get down to Montana. So I would like to look into examining that, because that could be a really nice area for walkability.
Thank you. Allison?
I think I would have to study that much more, but off the top of my head, that Windward Plaza where they did the Venice sign, they light up the sign. I've chatted with a lot of folks who believe, especially with the parklets on either side now for the restaurants, that does make sense, and the cars coming in and out create a bit of a danger. I like the idea. However, I think in congested areas like West LA near Brentwood, I'm just not sure. So again, I would have to look at the data there. The promenade was brilliant. I was actually around before the promenade was blocked off, and it has created this beautiful area where that's walkable. But they did an incredible job also of creating parking and busing and transit to make that happen. So there'll be a lot of pieces to put together, but I'm definitely open to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Erin?
Yeah, I mean, the other Venice guy on this call is Windward and Abbot Kinney are the first two that come to my mind as places that are just naturally fit for it. But to really answer the question about how to do it, I think one is taking business lead. I think a lot of small businesses would love this. The more walkability means more foot traffic, means more business, and something that we see like in European cities all the time. And so I think this is something that could be quite popular with businesses. And so instead of spending money on, say, bids and enforcement, just increasing foot traffic and business and safety that way. So I guess I would say I have my own ideas, but I would also, defer to small business leaders on who wants to do it, and if there's like a kind of nucleus of different businesses that would want to do it, and it wouldn't kind of congest thoroughfares. I think that's where you do it, and it would really make the city more livable.
Guys, let's get through one more, but 30 seconds each, if we can. And Mike, you're going to go first on this one. Right. So I'm going to reframe this slightly, because I know that a lot of this is a budget, but would you give the Expo line priority? Meaning, would the train get priority over car convenience? And would you allow the train to just flow on its route? And I guess secondly, would you support elevating the rail over city streets where possible in the district? So we'll start with Mike. 30
Yeah,
seconds.
I think both make sense to look at. I mean, first of all, the key ingredient here is that the expo line has to actually seamlessly connect so people can use it to get from point A to point B efficiently. If that's the case, then yes, I'd support it. Number two, raising it up, I absolutely support, because we could also use that space underneath a lot of different ways. So yes, theoretically, I'm in favor of both.
Thank you. Allison?
I'm definitely in favor of both. I think it's brilliant, the idea of raising. You wouldn't have all those issues regarding methane gas that we've encountered in the past. And it literally is one of the few ways that we can get people less car dependent, and less car dependency will decrease our carbon footprint. It will also lessen poverty, because there's a lot of evidence that shows that people enter poverty because they're car dependent. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, I mean, these are both great ideas. And at the end of the day, this is part of a larger constellation of ideas to get people out of their cars and into public transit. And the expo line is the one way, but also, we also have to, expand the purple line into the west side, and then have it spoke out from right now where it terminates. Well, it's planned to terminate at the VA. But yeah, this is a great idea. And at the end of the day, I really would love to live in a city where you should say like, oh, there's the L, it's like an elevated rail, like, like, oh, see you at the L.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, Michael, I also think these are both really good ideas. I mean, the bottom line is getting people on transit is predicated on them seeing a value proposition and being able to move faster. And doing elevated rail, could potentially be much more efficient, not only in terms of use, but also in terms of getting it built out. And so, yeah, I'd be very, very game to exploring both of these.
Thank you. Okay. Get through here. So I want to give a quick plug to our next mobility debate. It will be with candidates for Council District 15, and that will be May 3rd at 5:30. So we're going to go into closing statements, get the timer back on the screen. And Greg, you are first.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Streets for All. Thank you to the hundreds, I believe, folks out there who are participating and listening to this. I really appreciate the opportunity. To be crystal clear, again, my priorities are safety, and in particular focusing on areas around schools, and making sure that pedestrians have safe walking opportunities, and bicyclists as well. Walkability, employing and deploying great streets amenities on all of our commercial corridors, making it essentially a really appealing endeavor. And also, by the way, a safe endeavor and a climate friendly endeavor with trees and with green water capture or water capture infrastructure. Livability, making sure that folks aren't going crazy on the roads. And so you have dedicated bus lanes, the expansion of LA Now north into the district, and then equity, fare-free transit, expedited or dedicated bus lanes as well. And we're going to help us get there. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate being with you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thanks everybody for the debate, including the candidates. This is yet another one where we've had a wonderful civil debate, and just the dialogue has been massively high quality. I'm proud to have been part of it. Look, I think at the end of the day, a couple of things are going to have to happen to solve our problems. Number one, we got to get in our cars less, right? We can't add more cars to our infrastructure, into our street. There's no way around that unless they start flying, and that will create its own set of problems. Number two, we've got to create livable, walkable communities. We have to start building new housing units where people are going to actually use most of their services on a daily basis. Therefore, they don't have to get into their car. Number three, in order to incentivize people to use public transportation, it has to connect, pure and simple. It's got to get you to where you're going. It's got to get you there quickly. It's got to connect, and it's got to be safe. In order for people to actually use it. We can make it free all day long, but if it doesn't connect and get you there, it ain't gonna work. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Allison?
Decreasing congestion and our carbon footprint is absolutely critical. I support Streets for All. increasing our bike lanes, buses, and trains, and creating a walkable city. I'm a passionate environmentalist. I signed the No Fossil Fuel Money pledge. This is a unique time in our history to really rethink how we're going to develop affordable housing. And that's why I believe in the Livable Communities Initiative. As the chief advisor to the vice president of LA Unified, I led the efforts for the school district to become green, and we have succeeded. And I'm the one who takes swift action to get things over the finish line. Very responsive. I made it my mission to create a responsive office. When calls went unanswered, we answered every call within 24 hours. And I commit to take that same sense of urgency to making bike lanes, bus lanes, and getting everything over the finish line. And please check out my website at allisonforla.com. And I would be honored to have the endorsement for Streets of LA. Thank you.
Thank you. Erin.
Thank you for organizing this. Yes, I grew up in Venice in the 80s and 90s. It was much more economically and racially diverse then. And a key about an economically diverse community is a healthy public transportation system. And we need to address that. We know that there's a housing crisis and a homelessness crisis, but we also know that there's a transit crisis, that people commute an hour each way to get into the West Side to work. The system as it is isn't working. So we need to make a denser community that has infill along transit corridors. And we need to get people out of their cars into mass transit, into bicycle lanes, creating communities that are more walkable. Yes, that involves community input, but it also takes community leadership. And this is a real equity issue. And so it intersects with housing and planning, but also really a vision for how we're going to confront climate change. At the end of the day, we're facing a global crisis, and this means that we need to create a denser, more mass transit friendly community.
Thank you, everybody. Well, that's it. So we're so grateful for the candidates for being here and for your time. I do think we have hundreds between the Zoom audience and the Facebook audience, and this has been recorded, so we'll also post it on our socials. And we're really grateful for everybody being here and having a civil discussion on these important issues. So with that being said, have a good night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks a lot, everybody.